The cowboy was punished to marry the cursed Apache widow, yet he agreed without hesitation. John McAllister was the kind of man people in the small towns of Texas remembered long after he had left. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands roughened by years of hard labor and a face that seemed carved by the sun itself. His hair was dark and often messy, and his eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, as if they could see right through a man's intentions. John had grown up in the harsh world of the frontier, where life was unpredictable, and survival often depended more on courage than kindness. From a young age, he had learned to ride horses as if he were part of them, to handle a gun with precision, and to endure the pain of long days spent under the burning sun or freezing wind. But along with these talents came a temper that could flare like lightning on a summer afternoon, and a sense of pride that often made him act before thinking. In the town of Redstone, where wooden buildings leaned slightly as if tired from the years of wind and dust, John had earned a reputation as a man who lived life on his own terms. He was known to stand up for himself, for his friends, and sometimes for strangers, but that same courage sometimes led him into trouble. On one fateful evening, a disagreement with another settler escalated far beyond what anyone had expected. Words turned into shouts, and shouts turned into blows. In the chaos, a man was killed. It was an accident, but accidents in a place where law was as thin as the paper it was written on were never taken lightly. The townspeople, who had tolerated John's reckless ways for many years, finally decided that justice had to be served. The town's elders called a meeting in the center of Redstone. The wooden floors of the hall creaked under the weight of the anxious townsfolk. Men and women sat quietly, murmuring among themselves, waiting for the elders to speak. They had a choice to make. They could punish John with imprisonment or a hanging, which was common in the frontier towns. But the elders decided that a more unusual punishment would fit the man's life and his character. After hours of debate, they announced their decision. John McAllister would not be sent to jail. He would not face the noose. Instead, he was ordered to marry an Apache widow named Ayanna. The news spread quickly through Redstone, whispered first, then shouted, and finally discussed in every corner of the town. People were shocked. Marrying a widow, they said, was one thing, but marrying one who was believed to be cursed, that was unthinkable. The widow's story was known throughout the region. Ayanna had lost her husband and several family members in a series of tragic events. Some believed that misfortune clung to her like a shadow, and anyone who got close would be touched by the same sorrow. The elders of Redstone insisted that this marriage would be John's way of making amends. If he could live peacefully with Ayanna and accept her without fear, it would prove that he had learned humility and responsibility. When John heard the punishment, he did not flinch. He did not argue or protest. Some townspeople thought he was crazy. Who in their right mind would marry a woman said to be cursed? They asked each other. But John, standing tall and calm, simply nodded. To him, it was a challenge, not a punishment. Perhaps it was his stubbornness, or perhaps it was a deep sense of honor that others had never understood. Whatever the reason, he was determined to face this task as he had faced every other challenge in his life. The days that followed were filled with preparation. John packed what little he owned and set out on horseback, riding for miles across the open plains, through valleys dotted with wildflowers and over streams that sparkled under the bright sun. He thought about the woman he was to marry, not as a cursed figure, but as a person. He had no idea what she looked like, how she lived, or what she thought of the world. He only knew that the townspeople had judged her harshly and that he would have to see for himself. As he approached the Apache settlement, John felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. The settlement was located in a remote area, far from the nearest town, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. Smoke rose from small fires, carrying the scent of cooking food and the earthiness of the land. Children ran barefoot along dirt paths, and women moved gracefully, attending to chores and weaving fabrics that told stories of their culture. The beauty of the place struck John, and for a moment he felt the weight of his journey lift. Meeting Ayana for the first time was not what John expected. She was not a figure of fear or sorrow. She was a woman of quiet strength, her posture straight and proud despite the hardships she had endured. Her hair was long and dark, falling in gentle waves over her shoulders, and her eyes held a depth that spoke of both pain and wisdom. She studied John carefully, and he returned her gaze with respect, knowing that their first impression would shape the days to come. The first conversations were difficult. John had grown up speaking English, while Ayana's first language was Apache. Words had to be chosen carefully, and gestures became important tools for understanding. At first there was silence, filled only by the sounds of the settlement, the clatter of hooves, the crackle of fires, and the distant calls of birds. John noticed that Ayana carried herself with dignity. She did not flinch at his presence, and she did not speak unless she had something meaningful to say. The townspeople's warnings about her curse echoed in John's mind, but he found them growing less convincing with each passing moment. He began to see Ayana not as a supernatural figure to be feared, but as a woman shaped by life's hardships. Her sorrow was real, yes, but it was human, and human pain could be understood and shared, even healed. John realized that this was not a punishment in the way others thought. It was a chance to confront fear, both the fear of judgment and the fear of the unknown. Days turned into weeks. John worked alongside Ayana in the settlement, helping with chores, learning the ways of the land and showing his willingness to be part of her world. At first, Ayana remained reserved. She had trusted few people since the tragedies that had taken her family, and she was cautious about showing any warmth. But John was patient. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he judged, and slowly, bit by bit, Ayana's defenses began to lower. They shared small moments of connection, a laugh over a clumsy attempt to ride a horse, a quiet conversation by the fire, or a shared meal where words were few but understanding was clear. John began to learn about the stories of Ayana's family, the traditions that had been passed down through generations, and the ways of the land she loved. He learned to respect her culture, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who wished to be part of it. At night, when the settlement was quiet and the stars stretched across the sky like a blanket of silver, John often reflected on his life and the path that had brought him here. He thought about the townspeople of Redstone, their fear, and their judgment. He thought about the man whose death had led to this punishment, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But he also felt something unexpected: hope. Hope that he could make a difference, not only in his own life but in the life of Ayana, and perhaps in the lives of those around them. In those quiet moments, John realized that the frontier was not just a place of danger and lawlessness. It was a place of choice, of courage, and of the chance to build something lasting. He had been given a punishment, yes, but he had also been given an opportunity to rise above fear, superstition, and the mistakes of the past. The true challenge was not in marrying a woman believed to be cursed. It was in learning to see people as they truly were, beyond rumors and whispers, beyond fear and suspicion. John's determination never wavered. Even when neighbors from nearby settlements visited and asked about the cursed widow, he spoke only with honesty. He refused to treat Ayana as something to be feared. He refused to let the judgments of others dictate his actions. In doing so, he began to change not only his own life but the perception of those around him. By the end of the first season of their forced union, John had not only survived the challenges of the settlement, but he had begun to thrive. He found joy in the simple things: the sound of laughter, the warmth of a fire, the taste of freshly baked bread, and the sight of Ayana smiling just enough to show the spark of life returning to her eyes. And in this, John realized something important. That life, even when it seemed harsh and unforgiving, could be transformed by patience, respect, and the courage to face what others feared. As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John and Ayanna stood side by side, looking out over the land that would be their home. It was not an easy life, and the road ahead would be filled with trials, but John felt ready. He had accepted his punishment without hesitation, and in doing so, he had discovered the true meaning of honor, courage, and human connection. The story of John McAllister's first days with Ayanna was only beginning, but it had already proven one thing: that bravery was not only about facing danger, but about embracing the unknown, understanding those who are misunderstood, and finding strength in the most unlikely of places. When John first arrived at the Apache settlement, the air felt different from the towns he had known. It was quieter in some ways, yet alive with a rhythm that seemed to belong to the earth itself. Children ran freely, laughing as they chased each other through dusty paths. Women tended small gardens, carefully planting herbs and vegetables that would sustain their families. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires, carrying the aroma of corn bread, roasted meat, and the faint scent of sage. The landscape around the settlement was rugged but beautiful. Rolling hills stretched into the distance, and patches of forest created shadows that danced in the late afternoon sun. John felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He had accepted his punishment without hesitation, but now, standing so close to the woman he was to marry, he realized he knew very little about her. He had heard stories from the town, stories filled with fear and superstition. They said she was cursed, that misfortune followed her wherever she went, that no man could live peacefully with her. But John had learned by now that rumors rarely told the full story. Still, he could not deny a twinge of uncertainty as he approached the main dwelling where Ayanna lived. Ayanna was waiting. She emerged from the house quietly, her presence calm and composed. She was striking, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made it impossible to look away. Her hair was dark and long, falling in gentle waves over her shoulders, and her eyes were deep, holding stories of sorrow, resilience, and wisdom. When she looked at John, her gaze was steady, not filled with fear or judgment, but with a quiet wariness. She had been warned about him, about his reputation, his temper, and the tragic incident that had brought him to her doorstep. Yet she did not turn away. Their first meeting was filled with awkward silence. Words were few, as both struggled to bridge the gap between languages and worlds. John had grown up speaking English, while Ayanna's first language was Apache. At first, communication relied heavily on gestures, expressions, and the occasional word that they both understood. Despite the challenges, there was a mutual respect in the way they observed each other. Neither tried to dominate the conversation, and neither forced the other to speak before they were ready. In the early days, John stayed mostly quiet, letting Ayanna guide him through the routines of her life. He learned to fetch water from the nearby stream, chop wood for the fire, and help with simple repairs around the settlement. Ayanna watched him carefully, occasionally offering guidance with a nod or a soft word. She did not smile often, not because she was unkind, but because her heart carried the weight of loss. Each movement, each glance seemed measured, as if she were testing whether John could be trusted. John, for his part, was patient. He had faced danger many times in his life, but this was a different kind of challenge. He realized that earning Ayanna's trust would take time, understanding, and respect. He listened when she spoke, even if he did not fully understand every word. He watched when she performed tasks with precision and care. Slowly, he began to appreciate the depth of knowledge and skill that she carried, the quiet strength that had helped her survive tragedies that would have broken many others. One afternoon, John attempted to ride one of the settlement's horses. He had grown up with horses and considered himself an experienced rider, but these horses were different, smaller, more agile, yet unpredictable in their own ways. He mounted the horse with confidence, but as soon as he nudged it forward, it bolted, throwing him to the ground. Iana watched from a distance, her expression unreadable, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. John laughed at himself, brushing the dust from his clothes. "I suppose I still have a lot to learn," he said, his tone humble. It was a small moment, but it marked the beginning of a subtle shift in their relationship. Over the following days, they shared more moments like this, moments of quiet laughter, shared labor, and unspoken understanding. John learned about the land from Ayana, where the best herbs grew, how to track animals without disturbing them, and the importance of respecting every living thing. He learned about the stories of her people, passed down through generations, stories of courage, survival, and wisdom. In return, he shared some of his own experiences, tales of the frontier, of towns he had known, of challenges he had faced. At first, Ayana listened without comment, but gradually she began to respond, offering insights, questions, and observations that revealed her intelligence and keen perception. Despite the growing understanding between them, life was not without tension. Cultural differences created friction, and there were moments when John's habits clashed with Ayana's ways. He spoke too loudly at times, moved too quickly, or failed to anticipate her customs. In return, Ayana sometimes withheld her instructions or retreated into silence, unsure how much to trust this man who had been forced into her life. But these moments were never destructive. They were challenges to be navigated, and both of them approached them with patience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John and Ayana sat by the fire outside her home. The air was cool, and the smoke from the fire curled around them. John watched Ayana's face in the flickering light, noticing the lines of sorrow softened by quiet determination. He realized that her so-called curse was not a supernatural force, but the weight of human grief. She had lost much, and yet she endured. She had every reason to be bitter or fearful, but she chose resilience. That realization deepened John's respect for her. In the weeks that followed, John became more integrated into the settlement. He helped with planting crops, repairing fences, and preparing food. He shared his skills in riding and hunting, teaching some of the younger members of the community. He did not force his ways upon them. Instead, he demonstrated a willingness to learn and adapt. The more he contributed, the more Ayana began to let him into her world. Trust grew slowly, but it was steady, like the roots of a tree sinking deep into the earth. One day, a messenger arrived from Redstone, bringing news from John's former town. The townspeople were curious about how he was faring, and some doubted that he would survive the marriage. John read the letter aloud to Ayana, sharing the words without embarrassment. She listened quietly, then said something in her language that John did not fully understand. But her tone was kind, almost teasing, and John felt a warmth he had not expected. He realized that he had begun to care for her, not just out of duty, but because of the person she was, her strength, and her wisdom. A turning point came when a sudden storm struck the settlement. Heavy rain poured from the sky, wind howled through the trees, and lightning lit up the hills. The small homes of the settlement were battered by the storm, and fear rippled through the community. John worked tirelessly alongside Ayana and the other members, securing roofs, reinforcing walls, and helping those in need. In the midst of the chaos, he noticed Ayana struggling to keep a small child safe from the storm. Without hesitation, he ran to her side, shielding the child and helping Ayana stabilize the shelter. After the storm passed, the settlement gathered to assess the damage. Though shaken, everyone was safe. Ayana looked at John with a mix of gratitude and admiration. In that moment, she saw more than a man who had been forced into her life. She saw a partner, someone she could rely on, someone willing to face danger alongside her. John, for his part, realized that bravery was not only about personal survival, but about standing with others in times of fear. Over time, small gestures became the foundation of their growing bond. John learned to anticipate Ayana's needs, understanding her routines and preferences. Ayana began to share more of her thoughts and feelings, trusting John with the stories she had once kept locked away. They laughed together, worked together, and learned from one another. The townspeople's warnings about a curse seemed less and less relevant. It was not a curse that defined Ayana, but her strength and resilience, and John had come to admire that deeply. By the end of the second month, the dynamic between John and Ayana had shifted significantly. What began as a forced marriage based on punishment had begun to evolve into mutual respect, understanding, and companionship. Each had learned to see the other as a person, rather than a symbol of fear or superstition. John understood that the true challenge of this marriage was not merely to obey a town's decree, but to navigate the complexities of trust, culture, and human emotion. And he found that he was willing to embrace every part of that challenge, not out of obligation, but because he had come to value Ayana as a person. As night fell over the settlement, the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, John and Ayana sat together in quiet reflection. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but they faced it together. John had come to the settlement as a man carrying a punishment, but he began to see that he had also found an opportunity, a chance to build something meaningful, to understand and connect with another human being in a way that transcended fear and superstition. The story of John McAllister and Ayana was only beginning, yet it had already become a story of courage, patience, and the slow, steady building of trust. John had stepped into a world he did not fully understand, and in doing so, he had discovered that bravery was not only about facing physical danger, but about opening one's heart to another person, learning their ways and choosing respect over fear. Life in the settlement was far from easy, and John quickly realized that marriage to Ayana meant more than learning new routines or bridging cultural gaps. It meant facing challenges that were unpredictable, testing not only his physical strength, but also his patience, understanding, and respect for a way of life that was completely different from his own. Each day presented new trials, from navigating the rugged terrain to dealing with the occasional misunderstanding between him and Ayana. The first few months had been a learning curve, but now John faced challenges that could have determined whether the fragile trust they had built would endure or crumble. At first, the small disagreements were almost comical. John, accustomed to the straightforward ways of frontier towns, often misjudged what was expected in Ayana's world. One morning, he tried to cut wood for the fire without understanding the specific technique her people used. He swung the axe too hard and split not only the log but also a nearby fence post. Ayana watched silently, her arms crossed, eyes narrowing slightly. John paused, realizing he had made a mistake, and approached her with a sheepish smile. "I guess I still have a lot to learn," he admitted. Instead of anger, Ayana shook her head, and a tiny smile appeared on her lips. It was a small victory, a sign that even mistakes could become lessons if approached with humility. Another challenge came in the form of hunting. John had hunted all his life, but the land around the settlement was unfamiliar, full of terrain he had never navigated and animals that required different techniques. He would set out early in the morning, following tracks with determination, only to return empty-handed. Ayana, meanwhile, moved through the land with quiet expertise, showing him where to watch, when to move, and how to listen to the whispers of the wind and the rustle of leaves. John realized that survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about respect for the land, patience, and careful observation. Over time, he began to adapt, learning to move as the land moved, to blend with its rhythms rather than fight against them. The most significant trials, however, were not physical but social. Some of the neighboring settlements still whispered about the cursed widow and her strange husband, questioning whether John could endure life with her. They came occasionally to trade or visit, and their eyes always lingered with suspicion or pity. John and Ayanna ignored the judgment as best they could, but it was impossible to escape completely. At times the whispers stung, and Ayanna would retreat into silence, wary of exposing too much of herself. John, sensing her discomfort, would offer quiet reassurance. He never tried to confront the gossipers directly, understanding that respect and patience often had more power than anger. Then, one afternoon, an event occurred that would cement their growing partnership and trust. A group of outlaws notorious for raiding settlements had been spotted nearby. The warning came from a rider galloping across the plains, shouting that danger was approaching. Panic swept through the settlement, and everyone rushed to secure homes, livestock, and children. Yana moved quickly, guiding the women and children to safety, while John took up a position to defend the settlement. The confrontation was intense. John's experience with guns and quick thinking were put to the test as the outlaws approached. Yana stayed near the center of the settlement, calmly directing people, ensuring no one panicked. At first, John worried for her safety, but he soon realized that she was as capable as he was in handling crisis, albeit in her own way. Together, they coordinated the defense, blending his direct action with her strategic foresight. The outlaws, unprepared for such resistance, eventually fled. Not a single person was seriously injured, and the settlement remained intact. After the danger had passed, the community gathered to assess the situation. Relief was everywhere, but so was admiration. Iyanna looked at John with gratitude, her eyes reflecting a mixture of respect, warmth, and something deeper. John, in turn, saw Iyanna not as the cursed widow that everyone had feared, but as a strong, intelligent, and courageous woman. He understood that their relationship had shifted from one of obligation to genuine partnership. In that moment, the idea of a curse seemed laughable compared to the reality of human strength, resilience, and collaboration. The months that followed brought quieter but equally important tests. John and Sienna continued to learn from each other, deepening their understanding of both the land and each other. John began to participate in cultural rituals, not as a spectator but as an active participant, showing respect for traditions that had been passed down for generations. He learned to honor the ceremonies, to move with purpose, and to listen to the wisdom in the stories told by Iyanna and other elders. Iyanna, in turn, learned to appreciate John's practical skills, his courage, and his willingness to embrace her world. One of the most remarkable changes occurred in the way they communicated. Initially, language was a barrier, but over time, they began to understand each other beyond words. A glance, a gesture, or a simple movement became a form of conversation. They developed a rhythm that allowed them to work together seamlessly, whether they were planting crops, preparing meals, or defending the settlement from small threats. This silent understanding created a bond that words alone could never achieve, and it deepened the trust that was the foundation of their growing affection. Life, however, was never without surprises. One morning, a sudden illness swept through the settlement. Children and elders alike were affected, and panic threatened to take hold. John and Ayanna worked tirelessly to care for the sick, fetching herbs, preparing remedies, and providing comfort to those in pain. Yanna's knowledge of natural medicine proved invaluable, and John's strength and endurance allowed him to assist in ways that required physical effort. Together, they turned fear into action, saving lives and proving once more that their partnership was based on mutual respect, courage, and dedication. Through these experiences, John began to understand the depth of Ayana's character. She had endured unimaginable losses, yet she faced each day with grace and determination. She was patient, thoughtful, and incredibly intelligent, able to navigate challenges with insight and skill. John admired her not just for her strength, but for the wisdom that guided her actions. He realized that her so-called curse was nothing more than the town's fear of what they could not understand. Iana, for her part, began to see John in a new light. He was not just a man bound by punishment. He was someone willing to face hardship, to learn, and to respect her world. She saw that his acceptance of her life was genuine, that he did not fear her past or judge her for her losses. Slowly, she began to allow herself to feel something more than caution or wariness, a sense of connection, trust, and eventually, a quiet affection that surprised her. Their bond was strengthened not just by shared triumphs, but also by shared quiet moments. Evenings by the fire became a time for reflection, storytelling, and subtle humor. John would recount tales from his childhood or from his adventures across the frontier, while Ayana would share the lessons embedded in her own experiences. They laughed together, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, and found comfort in the simple presence of one another. These moments, small as they might seem to outsiders, were the threads that wove their lives together, creating a tapestry of understanding, companionship, and growing love. As the seasons changed, the settlement itself began to view John and Ayana differently. What had once been seen as a forced and dangerous union began to be admired. Their partnership had proven that courage and respect could overcome fear and superstition. The community saw that John was not there to exploit or dominate, but to stand with Ayana, to learn, and to protect. Ayana, in turn, had found a partner who honored her, valued her wisdom, and shared her commitment to their community. By the end of the year, John and Ayana had transformed the perception of their marriage. Where once neighbors whispered about curses and misfortune, now they spoke of strength, resilience, and respect. John's willingness to embrace the unknown, to face challenges alongside Ayana without hesitation, had changed not only his life, but also the lives of those around him. Their story was becoming a testament to the power of courage, patience, and human connection, a story that would be remembered long after the dust of the frontier had settled. Yet even as their relationship grew stronger, John knew that the road ahead would not always be smooth. There would be new challenges, moments of misunderstanding, and tests of patience. But he also knew that together, they had proven they could face anything. The experiences they had shared, the storms, the illness, the attacks, the cultural lessons, had forged a bond that could withstand fear, superstition, and adversity. In the quiet moments before sleep, John often reflected on how far he and Ayana had come. He thought of the man he had been when he arrived at the settlement, a man facing punishment and uncertainty. He compared that to the man he was now, someone who had learned humility, patience, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly were. He realized that the so-called curse had been nothing more than a challenge, an opportunity to rise above fear and misunderstanding. And in that realization, John felt a sense of peace, hope, and purpose that he had never known before. As time passed, John and Ayana's relationship began to transform in ways neither of them had expected. What had started as a marriage forced by punishment evolved into a partnership grounded in trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding. The initial awkwardness, hesitation, and distance had faded, replaced by a bond that grew stronger with each shared experience. Life in the settlement continued to be challenging, but together, they faced every trial with courage and patience, discovering that the hardships they endured only brought them closer. The changes in their relationship were subtle at first, visible in small actions and gestures. John noticed that Ayana's smile appeared more frequently, often when he was nearby, and that she would seek his opinion on decisions, even if only with a quiet nod or a glance. Gianna, in turn, observed John with more warmth than before, noting how he had adapted to her world, learned the ways of the land, and respected her people's customs. Their conversations, once constrained by language and caution, now flowed more easily, filled with curiosity, humor, and a shared sense of purpose. One afternoon, John and Ayana went to a nearby river to fish. The sun was warm on their backs, the water sparkled under its rays, and the gentle sound of flowing water created a peaceful backdrop. John had learned the best fishing techniques from the settlers, but Ayana knew the river in ways that even he could not fully understand. She taught him where the fish liked to hide, when to move quietly, and how to read the subtle signs of the water's movement. John watched her with admiration, amazed by her knowledge and patience. He realized that true strength was not only physical, but also intellectual and emotional. Their day by the river was filled with laughter and light-hearted competition. John would tease Ayana when she caught more fish than him, and she would respond with quiet amusement, shaking her head but smiling nonetheless. These moments, simple as they were, became the foundation of their growing affection. John began to feel something deeper than respect for Ayana's courage and skill. He felt admiration for the person she was, for the wisdom and resilience she carried, and for the kindness and patience she showed even in the face of past tragedy. Life in the settlement was never entirely free from danger, and it was during one such moment that the true depth of their bond was revealed. One evening, a fire broke out on the outskirts of the settlement, threatening homes, crops, and livestock. Flames danced dangerously close to their dwelling, and panic swept through the community. John, without hesitation, rushed to help, coordinating efforts to contain the fire. Gianna, standing beside him, directed the women and children to safety, her voice calm yet authoritative. They worked seamlessly together, John taking physical action and Gianna providing strategic guidance. By the time the fire was under control, several homes had been damaged, but no lives were lost. The community was grateful, and their respect for John and Ayana deepened. In that moment, Ayana looked at John with a mixture of pride and admiration. She saw in him not just a protector, but a true partner, someone willing to face danger without fear, someone who had earned her trust through consistent action and care. John, seeing her composed yet determined demeanor, realized that she was equally courageous, equally committed, and equally capable. Their partnership had become something remarkable, a balance of strength, wisdom, and shared responsibility. Over the following months, John and Ayana's connection continued to strengthen in both visible and subtle ways. They shared quiet evenings by the fire, recounting stories of the past, discussing their hopes for the future, and teaching each other about their respective worlds. John learned the significance of rituals, ceremonies, and the stories of Ayana's people, while Ayana gained insight into the life of the settlers, understanding the challenges, values, and experiences that shaped John. Through these exchanges, their mutual respect grew into affection, affection into fondness, and fondness into a quiet love. One winter evening, after a long day of tending to the settlement and preparing food for the community, John and Ayana sat together outside, watching the stars twinkle above the hills. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the fire crackled softly beside them. John turned to Ayana and spoke gently, recounting a memory from his childhood, a story of hardship and triumph. Ayana listened attentively, occasionally nodding or smiling. When the story concluded, she shared a story from her own past, speaking of challenges she had overcome and lessons she had learned. In that shared exchange, they found understanding and connection, realizing that their experiences, though different, had shaped them in ways that complemented each other. Their growing love was not marked by grand gestures but by consistency, understanding, and shared commitment. John began to anticipate Ayana's needs, offering help before she asked, providing comfort in moments of sorrow, and supporting her in every task. Ayana, in turn, opened her heart to him, trusting him with her thoughts, fears, and dreams. They laughed together, worked together, and faced every challenge side by side. The townspeople's earlier warnings about a curse seemed increasingly irrelevant, for it was clear to everyone who observed them that their union was no longer one of punishment or obligation, but of genuine partnership and affection. Despite their closeness, they were not immune to disagreements. Differences in culture, perspective, and experience sometimes led to tension, but each disagreement was approached with patience and a willingness to understand. John learned to listen more carefully, to respect Ayana's opinions, and to compromise when necessary. Ayana learned to trust John's judgment, to accept his perspective, and to recognize his efforts to honor her world. These challenges, rather than weakening their bond, strengthened it, reinforcing their understanding of each other and their commitment to navigate life together. Their love was further solidified when John faced a moment of personal danger. While exploring the hills near the settlement, he stumbled upon a wild animal that had been injured and aggressive. In the struggle that followed, John was slightly hurt but managed to protect both himself and the animal. Yana arrived soon after, offering assistance and ensuring he was unharmed. This incident, though minor, symbolized the deep trust and care that had developed between them. They were partners in every sense, looking out for each other's safety, well-being, and happiness. As the seasons continued to change, John and Ayana also began to plan for the future. They discussed the possibility of children, the growth of the settlement, and the ways they could contribute to the community. Their conversations were filled with hope, practicality, and mutual respect. John shared his knowledge of frontier life. Ayana shared her understanding of the land and culture, and together they envisioned a future that honored both worlds. This planning reflected a profound shift, from a marriage born of punishment to a life built on collaboration, trust, and shared dreams. In the evenings, as they walked together through the settlement, neighbors often observed the quiet interactions that revealed the depth of their bond. A simple touch, a nod, a shared smile, all communicated more than words could express. John and Ayana no longer needed to prove themselves to each other or to the community. Their actions, consistency, and mutual care spoke volumes. Even those who had once doubted the marriage began to recognize the strength, harmony, and affection that defined it. By the end of the year, the transformation was complete. John and Ayana were no longer defined by the rumors of a curse, the punishment imposed by Redstone, or the expectations of others. They had created a life together based on understanding, courage, and love. Their bond was a living testament to the power of patience, respect, and empathy, a story that would be remembered and shared as an example of how fear and superstition could be overcome by the simple, consistent choice to see humanity in another person. Even in moments of solitude, John reflected on the journey he had taken. He thought about the man he had been when he first arrived at the settlement, brash, reckless, and unaware of the depths of human strength and resilience. He compared that man to the person he had become, someone capable of understanding, patience, and care, someone who had learned to respect life in all its forms, and someone who had discovered the profound joy of partnership with a woman who had once been feared and misunderstood. Yana, too, reflected on her journey. She thought of the grief and mistrust she had carried, the caution that had protected her for so long, and the moments when she had doubted whether anyone could ever truly understand her. Now she recognized the courage, consistency, and respect that John had shown, and she allowed herself to feel a quiet love that had been absent for many years. Together, they had built not just a marriage, but a shared life rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and genuine affection. As the sun set over the hills and the stars began to appear in the sky, John and Ayanna sat together, hand in hand, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The hardships, the misunderstandings, the danger, and the fear had all been transformed into a foundation for something far stronger: love, trust, and partnership. They had proven to themselves and to the world that courage was not only about facing physical danger, but about opening one's heart, embracing the unknown, and finding strength in another person. The story of John McAllister and Ayanna was no longer one of punishment, superstition, or fear. It had become a story of resilience, understanding, and love, an enduring example of how even the most unlikely circumstances could give rise to a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and shared courage. And though their journey was far from over, they faced the future with confidence, knowing that together they could overcome any challenge, honor each other's worlds, and create a life filled with hope, joy, and shared purpose. Years passed, and John McAllister and Ayanna's life together continued to grow richer and more fulfilling. What had once been a marriage born out of punishment had transformed into a true partnership and enduring love. Their days were filled with work, challenges, and the rhythms of frontier life. Yet every task, every moment was shared, making life meaningful in ways neither of them had anticipated. Over time, their bond became a source of inspiration not only for themselves, but also for the community around them. The settlement had changed along with them. Where neighbors had once whispered about curses and feared misfortune, they now spoke of courage, resilience, and cooperation. John and Ayanna had become a central part of the community, respected and admired for their dedication to one another, and for the way they worked together to protect and support their neighbors. Their home, once simple and isolated, now stood as a place of welcome and comfort, where people could gather, share stories, and find guidance in times of need. Children arrived, bringing new life and joy into their home. Each child was a symbol of the blending of two worlds, the frontier and the Apache culture, and of the union of two people who had learned to understand and respect each other deeply. John took delight in teaching his children the ways of the land, how to ride horses, care for animals, and survive the challenges of frontier life. Yana shared her knowledge of traditions, stories, and the ways of her people, ensuring that her children grew up understanding and honoring both her heritage and John's experiences. Their home was filled with laughter, learning, and the warmth that comes from shared love and trust. The couple faced challenges, as all families do, but they approached them together. There were illnesses to endure, crops to plant and harvest, and conflicts to mediate within the settlement. At times, storms would threaten their home or a wild animal would appear where it should not. But through every trial, John and Ayanna relied on each other. John's strength and bravery complemented Ayanna's wisdom and strategic thinking, creating a balance that allowed them to overcome obstacles that might have been insurmountable alone. Each challenge they faced strengthened their bond, proving again and again that their marriage was no longer a punishment but a true partnership. Over time, the story of their unusual beginning spread beyond the settlement. People in nearby towns and other settlements learned how John had been ordered to marry a widow considered cursed, and how, instead of fear or resentment, he had approached the situation with courage and patience. They heard how he had learned to respect Ayanna's ways, how she had gradually come to trust him, and how together they had transformed a union born from punishment into one based on love and mutual respect. Their story became a lesson for others, a reminder that understanding, empathy, and bravery could overcome fear and superstition. John and Ayanna themselves reflected on how far they had come. They often walked together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the hills and the plains beyond. John would sometimes speak about his early life, his mistakes, and the lessons he had learned from the townspeople and from Ayanna herself. Ayanna, in turn, would share memories of her family, the hardships she had endured, and the wisdom she had gained from living through so much loss. They found comfort in these reflections, understanding that their shared past, the challenges, the hardships, and the triumphs, had shaped not only their lives but also their love for each other. One particularly memorable day, a young couple from a neighboring settlement arrived at their home, seeking guidance. The couple was struggling with fear and suspicion, unsure of how to navigate cultural differences and challenges in their own lives. John and Ayanna welcomed them warmly, sharing their experiences, offering advice, and demonstrating through their own actions how patience, respect, and understanding could build a strong and lasting partnership. The young couple left inspired, carrying with them the lessons of courage, empathy, and love that John and Ayanna had exemplified throughout their lives. As their children grew, John and Ayanna worked to ensure that they were raised with the values that had guided the parents' journey. They taught them the importance of respect for others, for the land, and for cultural traditions. They encouraged curiosity, courage, and kindness, showing by example that life was not defined by fear or superstition, but by the choices one made and the effort one put into understanding others. Their home became a place where lessons were learned not only through words, but through the way the parents lived their lives, through consistency, patience, and care. The couple also took time to celebrate their own journey. On quiet evenings, away from the bustle of daily work, they would sit together by the fire, remembering the early days of hesitation and distance, and marveling at how far they had come. John often recalled the first moments he had met Ayanna, the awkwardness, the silence, and the uncertainty. Ayanna would listen and then gently remind him of how persistent he had been, how he had refused to let fear or rumors dictate his actions. These moments of reflection were filled with gratitude, understanding, and a quiet joy that came from knowing that they had chosen each other every day, despite the challenges they had faced. Even as they grew older, John and Ayanna remained active within the community. They helped mediate disputes, guided newcomers to the settlement, and shared their skills in farming, hunting, and survival. Their influence extended beyond their immediate family, shaping the lives of many in the region. The people came to see that the so-called curse had never existed. It had been a product of fear and misunderstanding. Through their actions, John and Ayanna demonstrated that respect, trust, and love could transform lives and change the perception of an entire community. One day, John reflected on the lesson that life had taught him. He realized that the punishment that had brought him to Ayanna had been a turning point, an opportunity disguised as hardship. If he had resisted, if he had refused to embrace the unknown, he would never have discovered the strength of partnership, the depth of love, or the beauty of understanding another person's world. The experience had reshaped him, teaching humility, patience, and the true meaning of courage. Ayanna, too, recognized the transformation. She had opened her heart after years of loss and fear, and in doing so, had discovered not only love but also a sense of safety, respect, and companionship that she had thought impossible. The story of John and Ayanna eventually became a legend in the region. Parents told their children about the brave cowboy who married the widow thought to be cursed, not because of magic, but because of fear and misunderstanding. They spoke of how the two had built a life together founded on trust, respect, and love, showing that true courage was in understanding and supporting one another. The tale was shared not as a warning, but as an inspiration, a lesson that even the harshest judgments could be overcome by empathy, patience, and bravery. In the quiet moments of their later years, John and Ayanna often sat together outside their home, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They reflected on the journey that had brought them together, the mistakes, the challenges, the danger, and the slow building of trust. They marveled at how life had unfolded, turning what had begun as punishment into a partnership that had enriched not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Their story, filled with trials and triumphs, had become a testament to the power of love, understanding, and human resilience. As they grew older, their children carried forward the lessons and values that John and Ayanna had instilled. They navigated the world with courage, respect, and compassion, bridging cultures and communities in ways that reflected the legacy of their parents. John and Ayanna took pride in this, knowing that their efforts had created more than just a home. They had created a future built on understanding, trust, and empathy. Even as their hair turned gray and the years added wisdom to their faces, John and Ayanna remained deeply connected. They continued to walk the paths of the settlement together, to care for the land and the people, and to cherish the bond that had grown from forced circumstance into something extraordinary. Their partnership had endured storms, danger, and hardship, proving that true love was not simply about affection, but about commitment, patience, and the willingness to embrace each other fully. In the end, the story of John McAllister and Ayanna was not defined by punishment, fear, or superstition. It was defined by courage, understanding, and the power of human connection. They had shown that even in the harshest conditions, love and respect could flourish, and that life's most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most meaningful journeys. Their legacy endured, not just in their children, but in the community they had strengthened, the people they had inspired, and the stories that would be told for generations to come. John and Ayanna's story became a beacon of hope. It reminded everyone that challenges, fear, and misunderstanding could be overcome with patience, empathy, and courage. It was proof that love could grow in unexpected places, and that the strength to embrace another person fully was one of life's greatest virtues. The cowboy and the widow, once bound by a decree and rumors of a curse, had created a life that transcended superstition, shaping not only their destiny but the future of everyone around them. As the sun set one final time over the hills that had witnessed their journey, John and Ayanna sat side by side, hands intertwined, hearts full and spirits at peace. They had faced life's hardships together, embraced each other's worlds, and created a legacy of love, courage, and understanding that would never be forgotten. In the end, the curse had proven to be nothing more than a story, while their love became the true legend, inspiring generations to come.